Good morning, lovelies. Last time we talked about Daemon Targaryen and analyzed his character, talking about how the writers and Matt Smith made him so popular. Today we're going to talk about Alicent Hightower and how she's pretty much the opposite. Just like last time, we've got spoilers for House of the Dragon, and since it has been years since I have read the book, and HBO changed a few things anyway, we're sticking with the TV version of Alicent for today. Cool? Cool. Now, some of you may have issue with the fact that I am calling Alicent a villain, even if I'm putting sympathetic in front of it. Most of the Game of Thrones audience sees her as villainous, but there's a sizable minority out there that roots for her and genuinely sees her in a protagonistically light, which actually happens a lot for sympathetic villains. The thing about House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones in general is that true villains are very rare. You can barely label anyone as a protagonist, never mind antagonist and villain. I'm calling Alicent as such for a variety of reasons. One, while Rhaenyra is most likely to be doing some shady shit in the future, Season 1 has set her up to be fairly traditional protagonist. The writers want us to root for her, at least for these first 10 episodes. Since Rhaenyra is basically our protagonist, that makes Alicent, at the very least, an antagonist. And what makes her a villain? Well, let's get into that. If you want most of your audience to turn against your character, an easy way to do that is to give them a trait that is universally frowned upon. Alicent has 3: internalized misogyny, hypocrisy, and pettiness. Now, internalized misogyny, this one is complicated, probably deserves its own video, and unfortunately is very real. Part of what makes a patriarchy work is by convincing not just men, but also women that women are inferior in some way. When a woman believes that she does not have the same rights as men, that's called internalized misogyny. And that goes hand in hand with hypocrisy. Because sure, Aegon can sleep around and flat out rape the staff, fathering bastard children that he throws into kiddie arenas, but Alicent's not going to hold him accountable. The worst she does is yell at him after cleaning up his mess. But Rhaenyra has a handful of consensual relationships in her open marriage, and that is inexcusable. Rhaenyra actively and openly explores her sexuality, again with consenting adults, and that makes her unfit to rule. But Alicent performing sexual favors to get information, yeah, that's fine. And then we have the pettiness. This is actually a trait that she and Daemon share, and it gets them both in trouble. With Alicent specifically, she is constantly sniping at Rhaenyra after that 10-year time jump, ordering her to give up Joffrey the minute he's born so she can do a parentage test. Bitch move. And she explicitly waves off any and all attempts of reconciliation. She'd rather stew than take steps to avoid civil war that can actually be acted upon in time to prevent said civil war. So, you know, her job? I'm salty, okay? Look, episodes 7 and 8, Alicent has several opportunities to heal, mend her relationships, to forge a future that will make everyone happy, and she refuses all of them. By the time Viserys dies in episode 9, it's too late. She puts the brakes on Otto's desire to kill Rhaenyra, but that's about it. The next thing that makes a villain, or at least an antagonist, is foiling them with a suitable protagonist. And again, we're using those terms very loosely here. Villains do not exist in a vacuum. They're created and affected by their world just like the rest of us. And every villainous protagonist relationship is unique. You can't replace one story's villain with another and expect it to be nearly as effective. With having Rhaenyra as a protagonist, look, most fans love her, despite some of her more questionable decisions, and they adore Daemon, who teams up with Rhaenyra against Alicent. If your protagonist is likable, or at least engaging, your audience is going to empathize with them and their emotions. If the protagonist does not like a villain, or better yet, was hurt or humiliated by that villain, that is a surefire way to get your audience to turn against the villain, which is what you want. Rhaenyra's relative freedom and control over her own life becomes a source of envy for Alicent, and thus something for her to vilify, which is very important. Alicent is the type of bad guy who thinks she's a good guy, which means she has to think that the actual protagonist of the show is the real villain, and that she's just a misunderstood hero. Look, Alicent is stuck, betting a man twice her age who's literally rotting on top of her, while Rhaenyra first gets her pick of literally every bachelor in the Seven Kingdoms, then goes off and has sex with Criston Cole, then starts an open relationship with Laenor Velaryon and Harren Strong. That's gonna cause some resentment right there. And yes, Rhaenyra did lie to Alicent about it. They live in a horribly patriarchal society that punishes women for the smallest infraction, and a horny teenage girl acting like a horny teenage girl is demonized. So Rhaenyra was protecting herself. One of the biggest themes of this show is pointing out just how stupid it all is, and how patriarchal systems destroy whole lives for no good reason. But Alicent doesn't see that. She sees it as a betrayal. She doesn't see the fact that they're living in an unjust system that's corrupted her as well. She sees it as she's playing by the rules and Rhaenyra isn't. And that betrayal is what ultimately causes her to turn away from Rhaenyra forever. It's her pettiness and her internalized misogyny coming out at once. Because good girls don't have extramarital sex, and Alicent is a good girl. By breaking those social rules that defines what makes a good, virtuous woman in this society, Rhaenyra has made herself a villain in Alicent's eyes. Even though she had just had a one-night stand with a man who turned out to be saltier than McDonald's french fries. It's okay, Rhaenyra, we all make mistakes. At least you dumped him early. Alicent and Rhaenyra are foiled in several other ways throughout the show, like in their parenting styles and how they treat their kids. But female sexuality and the patriarchy are two of the biggest themes of this show, so it's no surprise that their relationship with these things are what most clearly sets them apart and what ultimately turns them against each other. Now, I know what you writers are thinking. Chris, this is all well and good, but modern audiences are obsessed with sympathetic villains. I want my audience to feel bad for my villain, at least a little. Well, Alicent does that too. As much as I hate who she has become, I still feel bad for her. Sympathetic villains are hard to nail down. When they work, they're great, often the best part of the story. But sometimes the story has no business in trying to make you feel bad for the person who wants to commit genocide, and in that case, a pure evil villain is necessary. So make sure you understand your story's needs before you set your heart completely on a sympathetic villain. Lucky for us, House of the Dragon does require a sympathetic villain in Alicent, as her origins highlight the theme of the harm caused by patriarchal systems. One of the best ways to make an audience feel sorry, or at least a little pity for the villain, is to have them start on their path unwillingly, possibly even unknowingly, with purely heroic intentions. In Alicent's case, her journey toward villainy started with her being whored out by her dad. Yes, Viserys had just lost his wife, and she's grown up in his court, so she probably did feel bad for him personally and want to make him feel better. But her father, Otto Hightower, just wanted to raise his status and get more power, so when he saw how vulnerable the king was, he pounced on it, ordering Alicent to attend to him. And Alicent obeyed. There's some controversy over why, namely whether or not she had any personal ambition to be queen in the first place, but the biggest reason she obeyed is because, again, she was raised in a patriarchal society that not only devalues women, but emphasizes obedience, especially to their fathers. Otto says jump, and Alicent's only option is to ask how high. This leads to her getting married to someone she does not love at all, and this gives her political power, yes, but it also traps her in a life that she ultimately does not want. She has no friends, she's forced to sleep with a guy twice her age, and she's forced to have children with him that she's just not ready for. And because those children are male, that raises the question of succession once again, and her father takes the opportunity to further poison her against her former best friend. The fact that Alicent and Rhaenyra were so close before becoming enemies is another layer of sympathy and tragedy in Alicent's story. They could have continued to be friends for the rest of their lives if it weren't for factors outside of their control. More to the point, if the men in their lives actually cared one whit about these girls' lives, thoughts, and feelings. If the small council hadn't been pressuring Viserys to marry again so soon after his wife's death, because they didn't like the fact of Daemon, or a girl, ascending to the throne. If Otto Hightower hadn't put his own ambitions over his daughter's life. If Viserys displayed actual critical thinking skills for 5 fucking minutes in the entire series. He was such a good man and such a shitty king. The point is, Sympathetic villains don't usually start out as villains. They don't take those first steps knowing where they're going to end up. They take those first steps because they don't see any other choice. Or in Alicent's case, because they had no other choice. But eventually, they do have a choice, and they choose to become villains. This is where the 10-year time skip is both a blessing and a curse. We all have our opinions about it. Personally, I can see why the writers made that decision. They want to get to the actual Dance of Dragons, but we lost out on a bit of character development in that decade. In my opinion, we needed at least one more episode with the younger cast. This way we could at least see Rhaenyra and Harwin Strong get to know each other and start a relationship, Rhaenyra properly break up with Crispy Cole, Laenor healing from the death of his lover, Lena and Daemon deciding to get married and leave King's Landing, and you know Lena had to have at least heard about the accusation of him killing Rhea, so how did that conversation go? And of course, Alicent further descending into her villainous path. How exactly did she convince the king to pardon Criston Cole after beating someone to death unprovoked? You know that Laenor, and by extension Rhaenyra, fought hard against that. Better yet, maybe when she realizes that Rhaenyra is messing around with Harwin Strong, she tells Laenor, hoping that'll get Rhaenyra to face negative consequences, and she's utterly baffled when Laenor is like, yeah, I kinda wish I was sleeping with him too, but he only likes girls. What can you do? Yes, we can infer all of this, but we don't watch stories for the parts that they don't tell. Unfortunately, including all of that would have bogged down the pacing more than it already was, so I don't know. You win some, you lose some. Back to Alicent's conscious decision to start turning toward villainy. This happens, or at least begins to happen, in episode 7, where she makes two major decisions. First, she tries to stab out a child's eye. When her son Aemond loses an eye during the scuffle with Rhaenyra's sons, who not only hurt her child but are bastards, products of everything that she hates about Rhaenyra, Alicent just snaps. She doesn't think, shit, this has gone way too far, time to do damage control before anyone else gets hurt, and she certainly does not reflect about how any of her behavior may have contributed to the problem. She just decides that since her child got hurt, then so should Rhaenyra's. And when you're an adult, and you're going after a kid with a knife with harmful or even lethal intent, that makes you the bad guy! Luckily she stopped, but the attempt is still made, and it clearly draws the battle lines for the inevitable future conflict between the Greens and the Blacks, further dividing the Targaryens and diminishing any chances of reconciliation. That's not something you can easily redeem yourself from. The second big decision that she makes that episode is permanently allying herself with Larys Strong. Larys is the guy with the cane who burned his brother and father alive in Harrenhal. Foot fetish guy, him. It should also be noted that he's one of the people who further pushed Alicent and Rhaenyra apart when they were teenagers by telling Alicent about Rhaenyra's birth control tea after Rhaenyra said that she was still a virgin. He did this most likely because he realized that as isolated as Alicent was, she was going to need a confidant and master of spies, but only if she felt that she had a need for it, which she did after turning her back on Rhaenyra. Yet another example of how external forces, namely men, have further influenced her. But anyway, back to the arson. When Alicent initially learns what Larys has done, she is rightfully horrified. Yes, she wanted her father back at court, preferably as Hand of the King, but she was not willing to murder anyone for it. Even someone like the Strongs, who were so clearly allied with Rhaenyra, even fathering her bastard children. The thing about villains is that it's not usually their motivation that defines them as villains. Especially in a show like Game of Thrones, where everyone has roughly the same motivation. They all want the Iron Throne. But what divides villains from everyone else is the lengths that they're willing to go to get what they want. Sure, Rhaenyra wants the Iron Throne, but she's not willing to kill her husband to get it, or plunge the realms into war. She was holding everyone back in episode 10, you'll recall. Daemon also wants the Iron Throne, but while he's willing to kill some people for it, he's not going to trigger a civil war with his family. And initially, although Alicent does want to keep her position as queen and punish Rhaenyra, she's not willing to kill anyone to do that. She'll roadblock her in council meetings and play two-faced mind games all day long, but murder? that's off the table. But that begins to change during episode 7, when Alicent goes after Rhaenyra's kids and gets roadblocked. Battle lines are clearly drawn, and even though Alicent's side just gained a massive dragon, she realizes that this is going to get bloody, and her father encourages that mindset. He's still manipulating her, but at this point Alicent has made plenty of her own decisions without him. So when Larys goes after Rhaenyra's family for her just like he went after the Strongs, Alicent says, "No, but stand by, I'm gonna need you later." And kudos to the actress for the way that she did this, because it's very clear that she's still wary of Larys and bothered by his complete lack of morality, but rather than executing him like he deserves, and what would frankly be the safest option, she's choosing to ally herself with him instead. And if you choose to ally yourself with a guy who does not blink against burning his own family alive, you can't exactly call yourself a hero. Especially when she does use him again, giving him the green light to kill the White Worm, although it's kept ambiguous as to whether or not that actually worked. What makes Alicent interesting after this point is that in the very next episode, episode 8, she backtracks. She and Rhaenyra make actual strides in repairing their relationship. She's found a sense of peace and redemption through religion. She seems to have come to terms with the fact that Rhaenyra is going to take the Iron Throne and be queen instead of her son Aegon. But then Viserys' last words get her thinking that he wanted her son Aegon on the throne all along, and at this point she's too far down the rabbit hole to climb back up so easily. The thing about those last words is that Alicent could have very easily dismissed them. He was old, dying, drugged out of his mind with milk of the poppy. Any lawyer worth their salt will tell you that you cannot change your will in such a state. He's not in the right state of mind. She knew that, but she's been choking on her own rage for over a decade, so she decides to take him literally. And it's not like Aegon is a paragon of virtue here. She knows damn well what type of person he is. If it was Aemond, well, that would be one thing because he's at least competent. But Aegon is an asshole. He's lazy, disrespectful, bit of an idiot, doesn't even want the crown, and a rapist. On top of that, he fathers bastard children like Rhaenyra, but unlike Rhaenyra, he sends them to fight and die in gladiator pits. So it doesn't really matter that she's taken 2 steps toward redemption, and it barely matters that she didn't want to kill Rhaenyra or strike first if she can help it. Everything she claims to stand for, honor and righteousness and not fathering children out of wedlock, is completely undermined because she's going against Viserys' legal will, she's stealing Rhaenyra's birthright, and putting a man like Aegon on the throne. All because he's Viserys' firstborn son, and thus has a right to the crown. With, of course, the totally unintentional bonus of Alicent and Otter being the true power behind the throne. So yeah, she's a villain. Sympathetic, but still a villain. We're going to see a lot more of Alicent in future seasons of House of the Dragon as her character continues to develop. Season 1 was really all about establishing backstory for the entire cast, and while it wasn't perfect, it's still a fascinating character study, especially for a villain's sympathetic origin story. Let me know your thoughts of Alicent in the comments. If you're struggling with writing a good villain, I offer coaching services on my website, so go check that out. It's linked in the description. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies.